How's it going, everyone? Welcome to or welcome back to the channel. Today, we're actually going to go over some previews that were released by Wizards of the Coast yesterday that was a bit of a surprise. This is them getting out ahead of some leaks that happened for Modern Horizons 3. Now, if you've been with my channel for a while, you know I have a policy. I will not cover leaked content because I find it to be almost theft from my fellow content creators because they are given these things by Wizards of the Coast to make their own content, and I'm not going to trample on their parade. So that said, these are officially given out by Wizards yesterday. These are not like actually leaked content now. So we're going to go ahead and go over some of the cards where I think they're going to have some good implications for us in our Commander and Historic Brawl formats. And yes, I did say Historic Brawl. These cards are all coming to Arena from Modern Horizons 3. So let's get started, starting off with the card that's already been on screen. This is Urza's Cave. It's a land, Urza's Cave, tap, adds a colorless, or you can pay 3, tap, and sack it to go get any land out of your deck. It doesn't matter. You can go get a Nykthos, you can go get a Vesuva, you can go get a Thespian Stage, whatever you want to get out of your deck that is going to help you. You can use this, go get it, and you can go to town. So this is going to have a lot of implications, and it will probably see a lot of play in different decks, especially those that are based around lands. So let's go ahead and move on to the next card here, and that is Nether Goif. This is a new Goif. Now, the leaks showed, because I've actually looked at some of the other leak stuff, that there's going to be a little bit of a Goif motif to some of this set, and this is the one that they've officially shown. So we have Nether Goif. It's a black Lure Goif. Power is equal to the number of card types among cards in your graveyard, and then toughness equal to that number plus 1. If this sounds familiar, this is the outlay of how Tarmogoyf is set up, but this costs 1 less to cast, but it's black instead of green, and it has Escape attached to it. For 2 and a black, you can exile any number of other cards from your graveyard with 4 or more card types among them. But then, of course, that makes this Goif weaker when you do it. But this might actually see some play, especially if there's like a Lure Goif, what is it, Kindred deck, that's the word I'm looking for, where you're all about the Goifs. So this could be a fun card for Commander in that aspect. And then we have a new dragon. It's an Eldrazi Dragon, which is, I think this is the first time we've seen this. Harrogast Erupting Nullkite for 9 colorless. It's a 6/6 Eldrazi Dragon with Emerge 6 red. Emerge is a discounting effect where you can sack a creature and then you subtract the mana value of that sacrificed creature from the emerge cost, and then you just pay the remainder and you get the dragon. So you could drop or sacrifice a 6-drop and pay red, and you just get this 6/6 dragon for 2. So that's pretty good. When you cast a spell, you can exile your hand, and if you do, draw 3 cards. It's a flyer, and then each spell you cast has emerge, and the emerge cost is equal to its mana cost. So emerge, it's not that great of an ability, or at least it wasn't when it was first introduced back during the, I think it was Eldritch Moon is when it came out. However, this card giving it to everything in your deck, including cards that didn't have it originally, this could be interesting. You could actually have it where you're emerging like big dumb stuff by sacrificing other big dumb stuff to kind of like swap them out on the board. And of course, we're in red, so you might be able to do something with like a Rakdos Aristocrats build or something like that, where you're sacrificing it and you're getting benefits off of those things dying. So this one has promise. I like it. Then we have a dog that everybody is talking about on Twitter. This is Felia Exuberant Shepherd for 1 and a white. It's a 2/2 dog with flash that when it attacks, exile up to 1 other target non-land permanent. At the beginning of the next end step, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If it was entered under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on Felia. So ideally, you're swinging, you exile something of yours that has like an ETB on it or something like that. And to turn, it comes back in, and then you get the ETB effect, plus Felia gets a little bit bigger. It makes it easier so she can attack in and do more flickering tricks. Or you flash this in, somebody's like, oh, I'll just leave this back as a blocker. You flash her in, you swing, you exile their blocker, and then you get it out of the way. A lot of people are like, oh, I can, pair this with like Containment Priest. Containment Priest says that whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield, if it wasn't cast, you exile it instead. So Felia exiles their creature, you flash in the Containment Priest, and when the trigger goes off, it's going to run into the Containment Priest and get exiled permanently for the rest of the game. And then the next card is actually a remake of a reserve list card that is banned in Commander. This is Konian Nightmare for 1 and a black. It's an enchantment that says when it enters the battlefield, you get 3 energy counters. You can pay X energy, sack a creature, return this to its owner's hand. Return target creature card with mana value X from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only as a sorcery. Recurring Nightmare is the card that this is mimicking. It's banned in Commander, and for good reason. It's very, very, very abusable. It's costs 1 more mana to cast, but all you have to do is sack a creature, and you can just juggle creatures out of your graveyard. With this, you have to have the energy part to go with it, and then you can start doing the juggling. So it's going to be hard to see. I don't know if there's enough energy producers in the format. This may cause trouble. We'll see what happens. I don't think it's going to be that busted because it's a little harder to get energy. Energy is kind of one of those things where there's not a lot of repeatable ways of getting energy, especially in black. Black is really not the energy color. That's more of like a blue and red thing. So we'll see what happens here, but this card, I would keep an eye on it. Then we have the blue free spell from the new free spell cycle. They've already showed off the green one, and basically the new free spell cycle is you have to sacrifice a non-token matched color creature in order to get the effect. So it's a little more balanced. Now this one is Flare of Denial, 1 blue. You can sack a non-token blue creature to pay the cost instead, and you can just counter a spell. Anytime you see the words free and counterspell, there's usually something going on here. And a lot of people are like, oh, it's not that good. It's in blue. But they're forgetting something. There are decks that utilize this kind of thing, such as Merfolk. Snapcaster Mage can flash back spells. So you can use Snapcaster to flash back something else out of your graveyard, like, say, Lightning Bolts or some other creature destruction spell. And then you can sacrifice the Snapcaster Mage, which has already used itself up, to counter a spell later. So that's actually really, really good. And then there's all kinds of functions attached to this. That this card, I think, is going to be a high price card, and it's going to see a lot of play in a lot of formats. Then we have a card that is the big brother of one of the most used cards in the Commander format, and that is the Null Drifter. This is Null Drifter. This is an Eldrazi Elemental 7-drop. It's a 4/4 that says when you cast a spell, draw 2 cards, it flies. It has Annihilator 1, which means when it attacks, the defending player has to sacrifice 1 permanent, whatever the Annihilator number happens to be. Or you can evoke it, pay 2 and a blue, play it, it immediately gets sacrificed, and then you get to draw 2 cards. So it's kind of like a divination variant almost, because you have to do this at sorcery speed. So it's just like a divination if you want to use the evoke variation of it. Or you just hard cast it, you slam it down, and then you have a 4/4 flyer with Annihilator 1, and you get to draw 2 cards. I'm not quite sure how much play this will see or what deck it'll see play in, but I'm sure there's somebody out there that will love trying this thing out and seeing what it can do. Now, this one was talked about a lot on Twitter yesterday. This is a carry-on line through for the Shards of Alara block with Knight of the Reliquary. This is the white of the Reliquary, which is basically the dead version of the Knight that's been resurrected. Black and a green 2/2 zombie knight with vigilance. When it gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard. Tap and sack another creature, search your library for a land, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So this has great implications for a few things. One of my favorite, most recent commanders, the Myco Tyrant, would absolutely adore this card because you're going to be able to fill your graveyard up with creatures, making this thing bigger. And then you can use this to tap, sack a creature, giving you the descend trigger on the Myco Tyrant on your turn. You can go get a land, and you get any land. This is almost in the same vein as what Urza's Cave did, where you can go get any land out of your deck. But in this case, you're able to just sack a creature and go get it. And again, you can go get things like Nykthos. You can go get things that make your creatures indestructible. You can go get the new desert lands that do ping damage. You know, whatever your heart's desire is with this card, as long as it's got black and green in the color identity, you can use this to help with your mana and do fun stuff with it. Then we have a reprint that I just recently actually recommended it in the high price upgrades for the Desert Bloom Precon coming out of Outlaws of Thunder Junction. This is Silen Safekeeper for a green. It's a 1/1 human wizard, sack a land. Target creature you control gains Shroud. So this is a great way to protect your creatures at the cost of a land going to the graveyard. But it's actually pretty expensive. It hasn't been reprinted in a while. The last reprint was actually in a Commander Precon, and the original printing was all the way back in Onslaught, which I think was about 2003. So we're about 21 years out from the initial printing. And it's just a really good card, and it's nice to see them finally printed, and it is coming into the modern format. It'll be in our historic format on Arena, and it'll come to Historic Brawl as well. So this card, especially if you have a lands deck that does fun stuff with lands, this card is a great addition to those decks, and it's also just a great way for green to protect its big fat beaters from getting blown up. And another good reprint they've actually put in this set is going to be Meltdown. X and red sorcery, destroy each artifact with mana value X or less. I almost said converted mana cost because that's what the original said. Meltdown was only ever printed in the original Urza's Saga. It's an uncommon, and it's like $10 because it's actually used in Legacy and those older formats as ways to blow up, you know, the Moxes and the type of like cheap artifact interaction that those formats have available to them. Well, Meltdown also punishes any kind of affinity decks or things like that. So it's kind of nice to see it coming into those formats for them. It's a good removal spell. And I think it's nice just for the commander format to have access to cheaper copies of it. If you want to use that as your artifact hate in your deck, you'll now have a much, much cheaper way to get your hands on it. And you'll be able to get a foil copy of it, which you could before, but those foil copies are outrageously expensive coming back from the Urza Saga stuff. Then we also have a new blast card. Joining Hydroblast and Pyroblast is Null Elemental Blast for a colorless. Now, this is the actual colorless that comes off of things like the Soul Ring and artifacts that tap for colorless or lands that produce this particular, the diamond colorless thing like wastes or something like that. Instant, choose one, counter target multicolor spell or destroy target multicolored permanent. This card is very likely, even outside of, you know, colorless Eldrazi decks, is likely to see some form of play because this has so many targets that it can hit in multiple formats. It does not matter that you have to have that colorless, as long as you have some lands that produce some colorless or the mana rocks that produce colorless, you can use this to counter commanders that are coming in for 1 freaking mana. You can blow them up if you draw it after they've already been played for 1 freaking mana. This thing has got so much going for it. And like your only downside is, oh, they're playing a monocolored commander or a monocolored deck, and this does nothing against that one opponent. And as long as your pod's not full of, you know, 1 color decks, that you're going to have something to hit with this, and that makes it really, really good. Now, the next card is an interesting card, and it has a lot of implications. This is Kudo King Among Bears for a green and a white. It's a 2/2 bear. Other creatures you have base power and toughness 2/2 and are bears in addition to their other types. A lot of people are like, oh, I can pair this up with Duskana, the Rage Mother that came in the Deadly Disguise precon from Murders at Karloff Manor. You could also pair it up with Ayula, the Queen Among Bears. You know, those cards you can use with these. But what I'm liking about this is you don't even have to care about the bear part of the card or the 2/2 part of the card. This thing actually makes it so you can shut down big, monstrous creatures. Say somebody slams an Ulamog across from you, so you're staring down the barrel of a giant indestructible Ulamog that's going to come, you know, crashing in, and you might not have any way to stop it, and you might be taking 10 damage. With this, you slam this down, it's a 2/2. It's a little more reasonable to deal with because then you can kind of, especially if you're in green white, you're gonna be able to build up your creatures to be a little bit bigger than the 2/2, put counters on them, equipment on them, auras on them, whatever. And then you're gonna be able to, you know, sit there and just chump block that Ulamog for a while. Now you gotta remember, some of them, the one Ulamog does have like Annihilator and the other one has exile 20 cards off your deck. So it doesn't take care of that part of the equation, but it does make them a lot smaller. It also makes it so like things like negative removal could go ahead and take out a creature that's indestructible. There's a lot of functions here that this card has going for it, and I really like it, so I can't wait to give it a try as well. Now, among some of these cards are also some of the commander cards in the commander decks that they have, and this is one of them. This is Siege Gang Lieutenant, 3 in a red, 2/2 goblin with Lieutenant that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control your commander, create 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. Those tokens gain haste until end of turn. You can pay 2 and sack a goblin, and it will deal 1 damage to any target. Now, this is like basically like what a Siege Gang Commander was before it grew up, because Siege Gang Commander you can pay and you deal 2 damage per sacrifice. But this actually can give you more tokens over the course of a game. As long as you control your commander, this can keep spitting out 1/1 goblins over and over and over again to either attack and overwhelm your opponent or just to have things to fling at your opponent or whatever the reason you have them. Whereas the Siege Gang Commander, it comes in and you either have to be able to flicker it or pick it up and recast it or reanimate it from your graveyard to keep getting tokens off of it, because it just enters the battlefield and gives you 3 tokens, and that's it. With 2 combat steps, this actually already gives you more goblin tokens than what a siege gang does, and you paid 1 less mana for it in order to get it going. You just had to have a little extra time to get it rolling. So I kind of dig this card. This will be in goblin decks, hands down. Any kind of goblin deck, this card will want to be in it in Commander, and I absolutely like this card for that kind of thing. There might be some other functions besides goblins as well. They're, you know, just token swarming decks might just want to have a copy of this just to keep pumping out extra tokens. Because if you pair it with, you know, token doublers of any sort, well, you get 4 right off the bat, and then you've already hit above the belt of the Siege Gang commander. So this is going to be a fun one to see what kind of decks it shows up in. Then we have what people are comparing as Black's version of Farewell. It's not Farewell, but we'll talk about that in a second. This is Final Act for 4 black sorcery. Choose 1 or more. Destroy all creatures, destroy all planeswalkers, destroy all battles, exile all graveyards, or each opponent loses all counters. Now, the only part of this that has any relation to Farewell is the exile all graveyards portion of the program. Everything else is different. We're not exiling anything, we're destroying. This is actually a much more fair Farewell, because at least if you're destroying creatures and planeswalkers in battles, you give your opponent the opportunity to possibly, you know, recover. Whereas Farewell, one of the big gripes of this card is that you have no chance of recovering. If someone farewells and they have no way of coming back from that, the game's just going to drag on. You never have a chance to recover from it, or they may have, you know, their hand loaded, they exile and they wreck all the stuff, and then they just overwhelm the game and they win right on the spot. This at least gives it a chance for people to fight back. On top of that, we also have a mode that removes all counters from our opponents. Now, we might be able to play a little bit of politics with this kind of mode. Say somebody's playing a poison deck and your opponents are about to get poisoned out of the game. You could cut a deal with them and be like, okay, well, I'll remove all your poison counters if you not mess with me for a couple of turns and go after the opponent that's trying to kill you with the poison. You have some incentive to kind of play around with those games. This also removes things like energy counters, experience counters. If you have an opponent that's messing around with experience counters and they've built themselves up a nice pile of those, all these things can be removed with that remove all counters from each opponent mode that's on this card. So there's some functionality there as well, and I do believe this card will see a lot of play in Commander as long as you're in black. Now, the opposite of fun is a stacks card, and that is what this card is. This is Winter Moon for 2 colorless. It's an artifact that says at the players cannot untap more than 1 non-basic land during their untap step. That means any kind of non-basic land, you get 1. That's it. Basic lands will untap, but everything else, you're going to get punished for running non-basic lands. So if your pods in Commander are running lots of 5-color or 3-color, even 3-color decks, they're going to have a lot of non-basic lands in those mana bases to make sure they hit their colors. And this is going to slow them down so much that it's ridiculous. And of course, this is going to see sideboard play in competitive formats as well. But yeah, I like this card for what it can do. And it's great for a monocolored deck. If you have a mono red deck or whatever, and you want to slot a copy of this in, you can have a good Punisher set up to shut down non-basic lands, especially if you can't afford a copy of like Blood Moon or something like that. Or, you know, colors that don't have access to Blood Moon. This now gives them kind of a light version of a Blood Moon. Now, the last 2 cards kind of work hand in hand together, so I'll kind of talk about them in tandem. First up is March of Velisvel for 2 and a blue. It's a sorcery that says choose a non-basic land type. Each land you control of that type becomes a copy of a target creature you control until end of turn, and they gain haste until end of turn, and it flashbacks for 4 and a blue. Now, you might be wondering, non-basic land type, what is that? Well, there are a lot of types attached to non-basic lands that you probably don't think about it too much as you're playing. Most recent examples being the caves from Lost Caverns of Ixalan, that's a type. Deserts from Outlaws of Thunder Junction, those are a non-basic land type. Lairs are a non-basic land type. Locusts, spheres. There's a lot of non-basic land types that most people don't really put much thought behind that this will affect. So if you're playing a deck full of deserts or whatever, gates, that's another big one. If you have like the gates deck, you can turn like all your gates into one of your big creatures. And like, was it Gateway Colossus, I think it's called. The one that gets discounted for each gate you control. And it's an 8/8. you could turn all your gates into copies of that until end of turn and smash in with a bunch of 8/8 gate lands. So that's kind of a neat thing. Now, like I said, this is actually kind of a hand in hand with the last card I want to talk about, and that is Planar Nexus. It's a land, and it says it's every non-basic land type. Tap, add a colorless, and then for 1 and tap, add 1 mana of any color. So this thing is everything. It's a cave, it's a locust, it's a sphere, it's a lair, it's all that stuff. So this can be, you can name whatever on like that March of Velasvel, and then this will become that, and then you can just go, smashing in with one of these. This is kind of a neat one, and I like it because it at least gives you some filtering while supporting that other card. So this will see some play. I don't know how much, probably not a ton, but we'll find out. But with that said, that is the last card that they have officially previewed of the leaks that have been going about. I'm not going to talk about anything else that was leaked because I'm not going to swipe the content from other creators. But if I want to know what you think in the comments below. Do you like the cards? Do you think they're powerful? So far, from what I've seen, the cards don't seem to be too far pushed. Like they're not like super duper strong like the evoke elementals were, and how they kind of like really shove them things at us. It's not like I haven't seen like a Ragavan level card or anything like that. I'm kind of interested to see if they do put some certain things, like this would be a good place, hint, hint, Wizards, to put something like a Dockside Extortionist into the formats and get us another reprint in a big set versus these little tiny reprints they've had. And because the card's running for $80 right now. And there's some other stuff. There's going to be more things coming. There's more reprints coming. I have seen some of the special guests that are coming here. Again, I'm not going to talk about those until they officially reveal them, but they're kind of nice to see too, coming back too. That said, I hope you like what I had here for you guys today. If you do, like, comment, subscribe, all those things help as I'm on my way to 1,000. I just hit 900 this morning. Thank you to that person if you're watching. And I will catch you in the next video, which was supposed to be today, but then this came out and kind of pushed my content back a little bit. And I'm going to be talking about the Fallout precons a little bit. Have a good one.